On June 17, 1972, Frank Wills, a security guard, discovered tape covering latches of the doors in the Watergate complex, which allowed them to close but remain unlocked. He removed the tape and didn't think anything of it.
About an hour later, Wills came back to discover new tape on the latches. He called the police, who found 5 men breaking into the DNC. These men were arrested and charged with attempted burglary and attempted interception of telephone and other communications.
Unit 1 to Unit 2.
On September 15th, a grand jury indicted these men, as well as G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt, their handlers, for conspiracy, burglary, and violation of federal wiretapping laws. Nixon initially said that the White House had no involvement in the scandal, and in November he was re-elected in a landslide.
Base 1 to Unit 1. Base 1 to Unit 1.
We have some activity here. Silence is advised.
Shut it off. Base 1 to Unit 1. Lights on the 8th floor. Base 1 to Unit 1. Is there anybody there? There's people. People on the balcony, armed people. Base 1 to Unit 1. Base 1 to Unit 1. We may have some problems. Someone's here.
Hold it, you must hold! Police! Put your hands up! Drop that jacket!
Good evening. We have a mystery story out of Washington. 5 people have been arrested and charged with breaking into the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee in the middle of the night.
The Democratic National Committee is located in the Watergate office building. The burglars forced a stairwell door, then taped its latch open. The door, now part of police evidence, was noticed by one of the guards employed by the Watergate complex. At first, the police found nothing. Then they spied 5 men crouching behind some desks.
Neither the president, obviously, or anybody in the White House, or anybody in authority in any of the committees working for the re-election of the president have any responsibility for it.
This could have been a trivial part of history if it wasn't for Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. They uncovered key information about the break-ins and attempts to cover it up, which led deeply into the Justice Department, FBI, CIA, and White House. This coverage dramatically increased public awareness and political repercussions, and revolutionized investigative journalism.
It later came to light that Nixon wasn't being truthful. A few days after the break-in, he arranged to provide hundreds of thousands of dollars of hush money to the burglars. Then he and his aides constructed a plan to have the CIA impede the FBI's investigation of the crime, and this was an abuse of presidential power and a deliberate obstruction of justice.
You know the results of the latest Gallup poll? Half the country never even heard of the word Watergate. Nobody gives a shit. You guys are probably pretty tired, right? Well, you should be. Go on home. Get a nice hot bath. Rest up 15 minutes. Then get your asses back in gear. We're under a lot of pressure, you know, and you put us there. Nothing's riding on this except the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country. Not that any of that matters. But if you guys fuck up again, I'm going to get mad.
Meanwhile, 7 of Nixon's conspirators were indicted on charges related to the Watergate affair. At the urging of Nixon's aides, 5 pleaded guilty and avoided trial. The other 2 were convicted in January 1973.
At this point, more and more people, including reporters Woodward, Bernstein, trial judge John J. Circa, and members of the Senate Investigating Committee, had begun to realize the possibility of a larger underlying scheme.
This hour, a select committee of the United States Senate is about to begin public hearings on something called Watergate. 1 year ago today, Watergate was just an address, a rather fancy, expensive address in this capital city, but now it has come to symbolize much more. The word crisis is perhaps too mild to apply to Watergate. President Nixon's White House has been shaken. Indeed, the entire executive branch of the government has been jolted by the continuing accusations and revelations, most of them, it must be kept in mind, not yet proved. 7 men, only 7 men, have been convicted for their part in the burglary. We see now Senator Sam Ervin, who is the chairman of the Select Committee, engaging in some banter there with the photographers who are clustered all about him. Senator Ervin will be the man wielding the gavel during these hearings, and he is about to do that right now. Senator Ervin has called these hearings the most important investigation ever entrusted to the Congress. He is well known as perhaps the foremost authority on the United States Senate, a former judge. There goes the gavel, and the Watergate hearings are underway.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
President?
Yes, sir.
Some of Nixon's aides also began to fess up, testifying before a grand jury about the president's crimes. It was also testified that Nixon had secretly taped every conversation that took place in the White House. The prosecutors realized that they needed to get their hands on those tapes.
During the summer and fall of 1973, Nixon struggled to protect the tapes. His lawyers argued that his executive privilege allowed him to keep the tapes private, but Sirica, the Senate committee, and a special prosecutor named Archibald Cox pushed to obtain them. When Cox refused to stop, Nixon ordered him to be fired. This led several Justice Department officials to resign in protest, and this is known as the Saturday Night Massacre, on October 20th, 1973. Eventually, Nixon agreed to let go of some, but not all, of the tapes.
In July of 1974, the Supreme Court ordered Nixon to turn over the tapes. In United States v. Nixon, the court ruled unanimously that claims over executive privilege over the tapes were void. The House of Representatives voted, impeaching him for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, criminal cover-up, several violations of the Constitution. He finally released the tapes on August 5th, including the smoking gun tape, which released undeniable evidence of his involvement in the scandal.
The smoking gun tape destroyed him politically. On August 7, 1974, Senators Barry Goldwater, Hugh Scott, and Congressman John Jacob Rhodes met with Nixon. They told him that all of his support was gone in Congress. Rhodes said that Nixon would face certain impeachment from the full House when his articles came up for vote, realizing that he had no chance of
Good evening. President Nixon reportedly will announce his resignation tonight, and Vice President Ford will become the nation's 38th president tomorrow. That word comes unofficially from aides and associates of both men, but not from the 2 men themselves. And the swiftly moving events of this busy day in Washington tend to confirm it. Those events included a late morning White House meeting between the president and the vice president, Ford's cancellation of a planned trip to the West Coast and Hawaii, the president's scheduling of a televised address to the nation at 9 o'clock tonight Eastern Daylight Time, and his invitation to congressional leaders of both parties to meet with him before that address. We'll return in a minute with the detailed reports.
From CBS News headquarters in Washington, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. And in Washington, Eric Sevareid, Dan Rather, Bill Jones, Bruce Morton, Roger Mudd, Connie Chung, Terry Drinkwater in Yorba Linda, California, and Ike Pappas in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Since Monday, when President Nixon released the new tape, the smoking pistol of the Watergate evidence that tied it directly to him, events have been rushing toward one seemingly inevitable conclusion: removal from office. Now, if all reports are correct, and there's no reason to doubt them, Mr. Nixon has chosen to take that final step himself. More from Dan Rather.
6 weeks after new President Gerald Ford was sworn in, he pardoned Nixon for any crimes he committed while he was in office. Ford claimed that Nixon's family situation is an American tragedy in which we all have played a part. It could go on and on and on, or someone must write the end to it. I have concluded that only I can do that, and, if I can, I must. Some of Nixon's aides weren't as well off. They were convicted of very serious offenses and sent to federal prison.
Some have argued that Ford's pardoning of Nixon contributed to his loss of the presidential election of 1976. Claims of a secret deal promising a pardon in return for Nixon's resignation led to Ford testifying to the House Judiciary Committee on October 19, 1974.
The true purpose of the Watergate affair has never officially come to light. However, it's suspected that Nixon was paranoid about his chances of winning his re-election campaign, which actually turned out to be a landslide against George McGovern in 1972. Some hypotheses suspect that the burglars were after specific information at the DNC.
Nixon never admitted to any criminal wrongdoing, but he did acknowledge using poor judgment. His misuse of presidential power had a negative effect on American political life. For example, the scandal left such an impression on both a national and international level that many scandals since then have been labeled with the suffix "gate." Also, the term "follow the money," a catchphrase suggesting a money trail or corruption scheme within high political office, became a known term, which is believed to have been uttered by Mark Felt, Deep Throat, to Bernstein and Woodward.
Additionally, while many Americans had been dismayed over the Vietnam War, Watergate further fortified the gloomy climate over America. Already scarred by difficulties and losses of the past decade, the Watergate scandal altered the way Americans viewed their presidents and political leaders, and created a feeling of cynicism and distrust in American political culture that still lasts today.